You are associating me with this, and you are attempting to get me
No, I'm asking
cancelled
you to
effectively.
distance yourself from that. Is
But
actually what I'm trying to do.
But that's not what you're doing.
I do not
You
see
don't
this as
think
propaganda.
that? Look at the way it's phrased on
Okay.
your article. This sort of race science is outdated and long since debunked, especially given the strong links between Atlantis and Aryans proposed by several Nazi archaeologists. That's like a part of the headline.
You want me to show you some tweets I've gotten from people that are fans of Graham
No,
Hancock
no,
and think
no. Listen, stop. Don't do that. They're not connected to him. They're just humans. There's a lot of crazy people in the world. This is you.
This was the debate that we needed but didn't deserve. Here we have two opposing forces coming together on the Joe Rogan Experience to settle once and for all the mysteries that have confused some of the smartest people in the world for centuries. Yeah, this might take a while, so let me explain. In the blue corner, we have Flint Dibble. Yep, that's actually his real name. He represents the establishment archaeology discipline.
Yeah, hi, my name is Flint, and I'm an archaeologist. I've done archaeology my whole life. My dad was an archaeologist, and I'm just very passionate about sharing archaeology and what we do. I find in general that people don't really understand what modern archaeology is about. And so I'm going to try to get that across while here. You know, that's my goal.
Fantastic.
And apart from Indiana Jones cosplay, he's also known for being his father's son.
And so what I want to do is focus on where my own experience and expertise is. My dad was an Ice Age archaeologist. He studied Neanderthal caves. They're all modern replicas made by archaeologists. Some of them made by my dad, and some of them have been made
I
by...
thought you could hook us up with some real stuff.
Quite it either. This is a Middle Paleolithic style core that my dad made. But the earliest stone tools are quite large.
Tell me how much of the Sahara you think has actually been excavated, Flint, by archaeologists.
I'd say a bunch of it has been surveyed, including by my dad. I just want to dedicate this quick thing to my dad. He was an Ice Age archaeologist. This site's underwater. They all date to the end of the Ice Age. And so they're lithic scatters, just like my dad found in the Sahara Desert.
Archaeologists see me as public enemy number one. That's
but you
exactly
started off
what I
by
said.
saying we're not sitting around thinking about you. Most of my dad's colleagues, when I mentioned I'm coming on here to do this, they had no idea you talk about the Ice Age. Can we talk about some agriculture?
Sure.
All right, cool. Can you boot up my HDMI?
You got all excited.
Yeah. This is like my stuff, finally. I did my dad's stuff earlier. Now I get to do some of my stuff.
Bro loves his dad. I'll come back to that a little later, because in the red corner we have the Alex Jones of history and archaeology, Graham Hancock.
And Graham, everybody knows you. You've been on this podcast about 10 times.
Largely thanks to you, Joe.
Well, I'm very happy to introduce the world to it.
Apart from trolling the whole discipline of archaeology for the last 35 years, Graham also broke the record for the most times anyone has ever changed spectacles in a single episode of JRE.
How do I search Natufian? There are many predecessor cultures. The question is...
Who worked in stone.
The question is... when did this stonework, if you look at the research by Huckley and Gopher, for example, and of the introduction of geometric elements into the stonework, I think this would be a good moment for me to just give a little bit of information about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
Okay.
Can we do that? Because it's very important to my feelings about all of this. God, these short sight, I tell you, being 73 is no joke.
And we all know who Joe Rogan is.
Just the fact, I mean, I know we're in the middle of this crazy debate, but just the wonder of nature itself, the complexity involved in these natural life forms adapting to their environment is so fascinating.
Okay, now that we've got all of that out of the way, let's get serious for a moment. What are we doing here, B? Here we have two opposing forces. Flint Dibble, and yes, that's actually his real name, he represents mainstream archaeology academia. He's what's known as a classical archaeologist because he focuses on ancient Greece, more specifically in the area of food and agriculture. He studies mostly food trash in the form of animal bones, and he has bachelor's and master's degrees as well as a PhD. Graham Hancock, on the other hand, has a very different background. He studied sociology at university, then became a journalist, and didn't actually start trolling archaeologists until he was in his 40s. But Graham's rise to fame is actually quite interesting. You see, he was one of the first so-called serious guests on Joe Rogan's podcast, his first appearance dating back to episode 142 in 2011.
The internet has been a very fascinating thing for me in the many years that I've been on it. But one of the most fascinating things about it is the ability to get in touch with people that if you were
younger, like a long time ago, there was no chance I would be able to sit down with you and do a conversation. Graham Hancock is probably the one guy who's influenced my view of history more than anybody ever. It's from this book, Fingerprints of the Gods. You have spent an enormous chunk of your life uncovering all these different structures and all these different monuments and all these different things that you attribute to a lost era.
Since then, Hancock's appeared on JRE over a dozen times and they've become close friends. Rogan even appeared in Hancock's 2022 Netflix series titled Ancient Apocalypse in an effort to support his work. Imagine getting Joe Rogan to appear in your documentary about the history of civilization to give it credibility. Anyway, I digress. The point of contention is this. Mainstream archaeology has long held the view that indigenous populations around the world independently derived their own systems of architecture, agriculture, engineering, and astronomy, even though they share similar characteristics with each other but never crossed paths. He believes these civilizing heroes walked across continents when sea levels were several hundred feet lower than they are now, and that's why there is little to no evidence of their journeys or their existence. So as you can imagine, if mainstream archaeologists were to accept his version of the beginnings of civilization, it would completely flip the whole academic discipline of archaeology on its head.
Somebody's building a road or building apartment buildings or building a dam, and they call in archaeologists to see if there's any interesting archaeology there. This is part of the problem I have with archaeology as a discipline. It likes to think of itself as scientific, but what I think it's primarily doing, and it is weird, is trying to control the narrative about the past. Because archaeology is so desperate to be seen as a science, it tries as hard as possible to distance itself from any ideas that might be seen as woo-woo. Anything out on the edge, archaeology doesn't want to associate itself with. And then it takes the next step and really seeks to attack out on the edge. The reaction to my proposal that we've forgotten an episode in the human story, it's always been hostile since I published Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995. But with Ancient Apocalypse, much bigger platform reaching a much wider audience, the reaction was just hysterical, and it went on for a very long time. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I don't think archaeologists are involved in a conspiracy. I think the people who are attacking me genuinely believe in what they're saying, and they genuinely think I'm harmful. But that's like calling it the most dangerous show on Netflix.
So this argument between Hancock and the academic discipline came to a head when Netflix produced his series in 2022. This is where he laid out his evidence in support of this lost advanced civilization theory. Now, I rewatched the documentary series this week to refresh my memory, and the thing that stood out for me was just how overly produced it is. I mean, it's no more or less of a production than most documentaries these days, but it definitely dramatizes Hancock's theories through the use of graphics, editing, and a strong soundtrack. He'll make vast sweeping statements after making an innocuous observation by saying something like, "It's not just possible that a foreigner taught them their ways, it's likely." For me, I'd rather read a book on the topic or watch a podcast without all the dramatizations and sensationalism, but it did very well on Netflix. It stayed in the top 10 for weeks, obviously reaching a large audience. And that's what bothered archaeologists so much. They didn't like that he was getting so much mainstream attention for his unproven theories, so they wrote a letter to Netflix asking them to reclassify his series from a documentary to science fiction.
The Society of American Archaeology, they're saying that I embolden extreme voices that misrepresent archaeological knowledge in order to spread false historical narratives that are overtly misogynistic, chauvinistic, racist, and anti-Semitic. I mean, you apply those labels to somebody and you're going to get that person hated.
I did not write that.
No, your co-author, John Hoops, wrote it. We urge Netflix to add disclaimers that the content is unfounded. They want it to be called science fiction. In other words, that's a very clever way of cancelling me.
Graham, you're so much more of a celebrity than me.
Here's Flint. Netflix, correct. I'm sorry that I am, Flint. That's not really my problem.
But one thing that Hancock can't deny is that not only was his Netflix series mostly just a bunch of unproven, half-baked theories, he really did use every opportunity to take shots at the archaeology discipline. Instead of opening the very first episode with an introduction to his theories, it was basically a compilation of how controversial he is as a public figure, using excerpts from his appearances on JRE, newspaper clippings, and media grabs, all designed to make him out to be the victim of an establishment conspiracy to silence him.
You say that you're number one enemy of archaeology and things like that. You are promoting people to dislike what we do. We are doing our jobs. No, you started off Ancient Apocalypse by calling us patronizing and arrogant.
Archaeologists see me as public enemy number one. That's exactly what I said.
You started off by saying we're not sitting around thinking about you.
But the flip side is these archaeologists haven't held back in their criticism of Hancock. They've accused him of some of the worst labels you can attach to a public figure.
Pseudo-archaeology, as Dibble calls it, acts to reinforce white supremacist ideas. Flint Dibble interview, Ancient Apocalypse, Graham Hancock, and conspiracy theories. I mean, what the fuck is the conspiracy theory? That archaeologists are conspiring against me, which I've never said or ever suggested.
You claim we're trying to hide the evidence,
no,
just
I
like
don't.
with Clovis First. We shut down alternative narratives. That's a conspiracy theory.
Hang on, tell me where I've claimed that you hide the evidence.
And then came the claims of a widespread conspiracy. He won't say it in those words, but Hancock definitely believes he is the victim of an orchestrated effort to have him cancelled.
You have claimed many times that we try to shut down alternative narratives, that we try to silence them. That suggests there's an archaeological conspiracy where we're all working together to have one narrative.
No, it suggests that there's a strongly held point of view, there's a paradigm, and that those who go against the paradigm are likely to be attacked.
All of them still had successful careers for many decades. But Jacques Cinq-Mars excavated many other sites.
Right, but are you denying that he was attacked for the very thing that you're saying archaeologists don't do?
No, but I'm denying there's a coordinated attack.
The problem for Flint Dibble, and yes, that's actually his real name, is that Hancock has the benefit of Rogan's massive reach, which over the years has mobilized vicious attacks against Dr. Dibble on social media. So this isn't just a battle of ideas, it's also a battle of two opposing forces for influence over archaeological narratives.
So what is this right here? It says to Graham, Jimmy, and others, we see you and will share with the world just how you try to bully and censor us. Who's trying to censor you?
Well, I'd argue that when people swarm me...
This is a quote from Flint Dibble, by the way, from one of his tweets.
Well, there's times when people swarm me and they...
People online, you mean?
Yeah, of course.
Tweet people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, don't read that. You get involved in a discussion about some contentious issue that's public, the whole world can attack you. So try to connect that to Graham or connect that to anything. You're just dealing with people.
Mm-hmm.
He's not responsible for that. You're responsible if you engage and read it.
He copped a "don't read the comments" rant from Rogan. Imagine if Rogan tweeted something out specifically to address things people were saying in the comment section. Nah, that would never happen. He doesn't read comments, remember? But let's take a step back here for a moment because I haven't actually explained what this whole controversy is really about. Let's look at a specific example. Around 1519, the Spanish Empire conquered the Aztec Empire, which is known today as modern Mexico. Mainstream archaeology believes that the indigenous Mexicans, who were hunter-gatherers, had developed their own system of architecture, agriculture, engineering, and astronomy before the Spanish came along. However, Hancock believes that the indigenous Mexicans were visited by the survivors of the cataclysm that wiped out the advanced civilization he believes existed 12 to 14,000 years ago.
I mean, Flint, what do you make of these figures? What sort of ethnic group would you think they belong to?
I don't identify ethnic groups like that, man. Like, it's a stone carving. That's not how we identify ethnic groups.
No, I'm not actually interested. So do you see beards on these figures?
Yeah, and people all over the world on every continent have beards from different ethnic groups.
It's just curious that amongst the Olmecs we have this, and we have this, and we have this. And I'm just intrigued by that. I don't know.
That people look different. Yes.
I don't know what it means exactly.
So Hancock's theory is that because there is evidence of these same bearded people across different indigenous hunter-gatherer groups, he believes that all of these indigenous cultures were visited by the survivors of the same lost civilization, who have often been depicted as being light-skinned or white saviors.
So what the archaeologists were doing there, they were going back to Fingerprints of the Gods that I wrote in 1995, in which I reported indigenous traditions about the appearance of bearded foreigners bringing knowledge after a cataclysm to the shattered survivors of that cataclysm. And in some cases, in those traditions, those knowledge bringers are described as white-skinned, because archaeology has since taken the view that all of those stories were made up by the Spanish. And that seems to me completely ridiculous. Both in Mexico and in Peru and Bolivia, we have traditions. We have them Viracocha, we have Quetzalcoatl, we have Bochica. I think it's racist of archaeology to imagine that the magic powers of the Spaniards could impose a myth upon indigenous peoples all over the Americas, that they'd just be so stupid that they would fall for this story told by the Spaniards. Of course, these are indigenous myths and traditions. And I was reporting them in that book, and I stand by them.
Hopefully, if you're unfamiliar with this debate and this is all new to you, you can start to appreciate why there's so much resistance to Hancock's ideas here. The implication is that indigenous cultures around the world were saved and shaped by a surviving white or light-skinned advanced culture that lived on to spread their knowledge and wisdom across the world.
And I see this as actually an example of the problems here, because you cite Spanish colonial literature about, say, a white Quetzalcoatl coming. You talk about this as different kinds of people. Yes, you do.
We've got to get correct on this. Are you saying that the whole story of the bearded, pale-skinned Quetzalcoatl was a Spanish invention?
Yes, I am. I can show you a depiction of Quetzalcoatl from the pre-Spanish period.
I can show you depictions.
Here we go. This is Quetzalcoatl on the Borgia Codex. This is from before any Europeans arrived in the New World. Yeah. This is on a hide. The ink has been analyzed, the hides have been analyzed, and this individual has tan skin, no beard, but a feathered headdress, because this is the feathered serpent god.
Well, actually, we can't see anything from that image. The point that I want to make is, do you think that the Spanish deliberately imposed an idea of Quetzalcoatl?
I think that every single source that we have of white skin in indigenous Americas comes from Spanish sources, and therefore I see it
quoting indigenous sources,
quoting them inaccurately, because people quote things in biased ways. This happens all the time. Because again, we have earlier representations of these individuals that show they don't have white skin. This is the document, Graham.
Do you regard the peoples of Mexico, the peoples of Colombia, the peoples of Bolivia as so stupid that they would simply accept an imposition upon them by the Spaniards?
So, no, I think that interpreting these kind of sources is difficult.
Okay, so this is the essence of the debate, and it provides a prime example of how Hancock developed his theories. Flint Dibble, and yes, that's actually his real name, is saying that archaeologists believe that these depictions of a bearded white foreigner are simply myths and legends carried over by the Spanish during the conquest of the Aztec Empire way back in the early 16th century. Graham Hancock is saying that they're not just legends, they're not just myths, they're actual depictions of real foreigners who visited and helped to develop the indigenous cultures. Dr. Dibble pushes back and says, well, why did they appear only at that time, shortly after the invasion? To which Hancock defends by pointing out that they're depictions of bearded foreigners with the indigenous people, therefore occurring before the Spanish invaded.
It makes sense to me that if a group of people were conquered by white people who showed up on boats and dominated the society, that they would have a great influence on a lot of the myths and cultures. And not only that, but that they would heavily discourage deviation from the changes that they've made to those myths. And if you did that over the course of one generation, you would have a complete different narrative.
Whether he's described as having white skin or a beard or not, we have a tradition of a civilizing hero, Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Bochica in Colombia, Viracocha in Bolivia, depicted as a bearded individual who comes in a time of chaos. The notion that the magical pen of Cortez could somehow have hoodwinked an entire continent into making up myths. And I just don't think that's credible at all. I don't understand what your video is telling us either.
My video is trying to explain the complexity of difficulty of interpreting Spanish sources.
So you can see just how contentious these myths and legends can be. Hancock saying that it can't be simply a coincidence that there are similar depictions of these bearded civilizing figures across the continent, therefore they must be depictions of real people. But then the counter-argument is that it's far too difficult to interpret these depictions with any degree of certainty.
Can I pause you for a
sure.
second, though? We know that once indigenous people are colonized, that they try to at least alter their beliefs and, if not indoctrinate them into whatever beliefs they have. And we have recent evidence for that in North America with how Native Americans were treated when they were put on reservations and brought into school systems and forced Christianity and told that they couldn't use their language. It makes sense to me that that would be something that would also would have been done by the Spaniards that entered Mexico.
Yeah. I'm not persuaded by that in this case. The myth is too widespread, and that constant reference to a bearded figure is very odd. And as a civilization bringer in a time of chaos, in a time of disaster after a great cataclysm, I don't think that the indigenous peoples of the Americas were so easily hoodwinked by the Spaniards.
I don't think it's hoodwinked. I think
Yeah.
it's conquered. Also, that you must take into consideration, I would imagine that a lot of these people can't read. And that they're actually probably not only being conquered by the Spaniards, but they're also being imposed upon with their language, which we know to be fact, which is why Mexicans speak Spanish.
Some of these traditions were recorded by Bernardino de Sahagún within 20 years of the conquest.
Within 20 years after the conquest,
After
though?
the conquest,
Right,
yeah,
but man, you could do a lot in 20 years.
Yeah.
So I hope that clarifies where these claims of racism and white supremacy against Graham Hancock come from. I think it's a massive stretch to make those claims against him. I mean, his wife's Indian, right? And for me personally, it does come across as mudslinging from a desperate group of academics to hold on to the integrity of their discipline by refusing to acknowledge even the slightest bit of truth in Hancock's theories, which, like many contrarians, can be right from time to time, sometimes very right.
On Dillahay, there was not an attack?
No, of course
Was
not.
there more than one person?
I have no idea. This was before I was even
How
a
many
scholar. I was a
architects were
kid.
involved in this?
Oh, a very large number. The Clovis First Lobby, the Clovis Police, as they used to be called by
So
other
it's not,
archaeologists.
it wasn't
Well,
one
think
person.
about how many people actually study the Clovis period. That is a tiny period in one area of the world. Most American
It's
archaeologists
fundamental to
study
the
much
issue of
later
the-
periods.
It's fundamental to the issue of the peopling of the Americas.
But it's direct. It's
And
also
that-
direct evidence of a group of archaeologists going after this one guy for saying something that turned out to be correct.
It's evidence of an academic argument, which happens, yes.
They wouldn't listen to his evidence, and he turned out to be correct.
What do you mean? He kept excavating that site. He invited people down there and convinced
But
them that
hold
he
on.
was right.
If they didn't listen to him and they didn't take the data and they did dismiss him, and publicly, they still did all those things that you're trying to obfuscate.
I'm not trying to obfuscate anything. That's not fair at all. He invited down a series of Clovis First people, and he convinced them at Monteverde. He showed them the evidence, and what resulted from that conversation was that entire group changing their mind on stuff. It was I'm not saying there were not a few bad actors. There's assholes everywhere. But what I am trying to say is that it's not some sort of conspiracy of everybody in archaeology against Dillahay,
But nobody
against
said
Graham,
everybody.
against
Nobody
whatever.
said everybody.
And nobody's saying conspiracy.
And this goes to the whole idea of big archaeology, similar to big pharma, big tech, or even the military-industrial complex or the Washington Consensus. It's when an institution or a group of institutions develop a particular set of narratives that they need to be true and widely accepted so as to preserve their own existence.
Flint, do you believe that there's such a thing? You know, we've all heard the word big pharma. Do you think there's such a thing as big archaeology?
No.
Oh, how odd. Because here you are, Flint Dibble. This is 2023.
It's scare quotes. It's sarcasm.
The reality is we live in a period where we're seeing an increased distrust of scholars and scientists.
Yes.
As an archaeologist, I think we have to respond by engaging with the public, and we do. In many ways, the reach of big archaeology is way beyond that of Graham Hancock. You've just told me you don't believe in the big archaeology, but right here you've said there is a big archaeology.
That's in quotes for sarcasm.
Oh, sorry, you lost me there. Because
okay.
you're saying so you don't think that the millions of school children and the teaching that the teaching of archaeology, what archaeology teaches us about the past, forms the basis of the education system about the past. Not people like me, people like you. Now you like to present yourself as this small lone voice, but frankly, by comparison with big archaeology, as you call it in your so-called scare quotes, by comparison with that, my outreach is very small, even on Netflix.
Graham, I was hoping we'd have a respectful conversation here.
Yes, I was hoping that you would not disrespect me in the way that you've done.
I came here to
by
present actual
associating-
evidence, and I've done that.
If there's any conspiracy here, who's it against? Let's move on. Next one, Flint.
Are you having fun?
The ball's in your court.
The ball's in my court.
Yeah, go ahead. Say something. Say something interesting. Say something new.
Say something interesting
Well,
and new.
listen, this is
Like,
not a
I came
productive
here to
way
have a
communicate.
respectful
Yeah.
conversation. I want to be very clear about this, Graham. I have only met you for the first time today, so I do not know how you are as a person or how you treat other people. And so, to be honest, I think that you've just tried to go and smear me back for what you see as a smear on yourself. Fair enough. That's okay.
I'm just presenting facts.
Yeah.
What you actually said.
I'm presenting facts as well from archaeology.
So I personally believe that Flint Dibble, and yes, that's actually his real name, is part of a group of mainstream archaeologists who are trying to discredit Graham Hancock and have him effectively cancelled by any means necessary. If you haven't already, go and take a look at Hancock's Wikipedia page. It's obvious that it's being controlled by those who seek to discredit him and ensure that he maintains no credibility and doesn't receive any credit for raising important questions.
I believe your friend John Hoops, or your co-author John Hoops, is one of the moderators of my Wikipedia page, which people cannot edit my Wikipedia page. It's locked.
But now we're all on the same page and have a better understanding of the background to this debate. Here is their 4.5-hour argument condensed into a few minutes. Get some popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy two nerds having it out in front of a UFC commentator.
Archaeologist Flint Dibble says Hancock's claims reinforce white supremacist ideas, stripping indigenous people of their rich heritage, and instead giving credit to aliens or white people. Actually, I've never...
Did you really say that?
No, I said that this idea of Atlantis, the way it goes back 200 years, it has been used for those reasons.
So you know perfectly well that saying that my work encourages white supremacism and encourages racism is going to end up with me being tarred as a racist. And you know very well that tarring somebody as a racist in this day, look, the results there, down there, make no mistake, Hancock is a white supremacist like Trump.
I put that in there as a paragraph, and I say he should not be citing these kind of sources without critiquing them because they do the harm. There's a lot of harm in the history.
Can you be specific about that? Like, what are these sources that you're citing about Atlantis, and why do you think that they reinforce white supremacy?
This idea of Atlantis from the 16th, built up into the 19th century with the book on Atlantis by Ignatius Donnelly, it described this as this kind of global superpower that was, European and that was responsible for these monuments in indigenous areas. It stripped credit away from local cultures of their heritage.
But this is something that is a very nuanced subject. Mm-hmm. And when you say that it reinforces white supremacy...
Again, I said the sources do.
This quote here, reinforce white supremacist ideas, stripping indigenous people with a rich heritage, and instead giving credit to aliens or white people. None of those things are true.
I know. Graham doesn't even talk about aliens.
Right, but
and so
did
that's
you
why I'm
say that?
I said that not in specific relation to Hancock's claims, but in specific relation to this narrative of Atlantis that has gone back hundreds of years. And I've showed you the kind of big data evidence that we actually have, which disproves your entire civilization.
Let's have a look at, it doesn't disprove my entire civilization. How could you possibly do that when you've only investigated less than 5% of the continental shelves, 1% of the Sahara, 1% of the Amazon?
How can you claim there's an Ice Age civilization and ignore all the Ice Age evidence that we have?
The Ice Age evidence that you have, I don't dispute it. Of course there were hunter-gatherers in the world in the Ice Age. There's hunter-gatherers in the world now. Why shouldn't an advanced civilization have coexisted with hunter-gatherers in the past?
I think we should probably take a break and clear our heads.
We can certainly take a break. But
I'm deeply unhappy that you have associated me with white supremacism, racism, misogyny,
if you didn't notice, it was always the same quote recycled.
I understand, but you said it.
And I did say it, and I said that there's this history of this idea which has been used by white supremacists, and that's an issue.
Right.
And I would like Graham to separate himself from that history in a stronger way, because he goes around the world to different cultures, and he claims that instead of their ancestors building this stuff, it was done by his civilization.
He doesn't cite a civilization that created it.
I don't
It could
know.
have
Sites and
very well
civilization is
been
teaching
the
people how to do
ancestors
it.
of the people that were there before in the exact same area.
It's you, not me, who say that that civilization was an empire. It's you, not me, who say that that civilization, had temples and was highly advanced in every point. I don't say that. I don't say that. I'm looking at, in my view, what we're looking at is a civilization like all others that emerged out of shamanism, that developed a highly advanced knowledge of astronomy, that was able to explore and map the world. And I'm saying that at the end of the Ice Age, that civilization was largely destroyed, that a very small number of survivors settled amongst hunter-gatherers as we would today. I've made this point before, but if there was a cataclysm on our planet today, people from our so-called advanced technological civilization would not survive it because we are spoilt children of the world. We do not have the survival techniques. The people in the world who know how to survive are the hunter-gatherers in the world today. And if I were a survivor of this civilization, I would head for hunter-gatherers and I would try and make my home amongst them so that I could have some hope of surviving. And that's all that I'm suggesting.
I suggest we take a little bathroom break, clear our heads, relax, come back, and let's discuss some of the ancient construction.
Now, I just want to make a couple of comments before I sign off. This was probably one of the most enjoyable videos I've made on this channel. It took me 3 days to make, which is by far the longest of any video. Most videos take me a couple of days, and sometimes I can throw one together in a 12 to 14 hour day. But the reason I'm telling you this is because this particular episode of JRE is proving to be quite popular. As I'm putting the finishing touches on this video, the podcast has over 3.5 million views. And I think the reason why people care about this episode so much is that we've been starved of genuine debate from people who are genuinely passionate about a topic. This episode felt real. We can call these guys nerds and laugh at Flint Dibble's name and appearance, or claim that Graham Hancock is a grifter who's just trying to sell books and plug his Netflix show. But at the end of the day, they're arguing about something that actually matters. It really does. These kind of disagreements have historically led to wars and even genocides. So I think it's important to explore both sides of the argument and actually listen to what Graham Hancock has to say, because contrarians like him have historically been proven right on many occasions, even though they've been proven wrong more often than not. And I definitely believe that there's an orchestrated effort to silence him from establishment academia because he's not following their rules and he's throwing a lot of their theories back in their face, not to mention that he's got a far wider reach now that he's become close friends with Joe Rogan. But we also can't forget that he's probably more than likely full of shit. And that's what makes this whole argument so fun to watch. On the one hand, Hancock's theories have flaky and circumstantial evidence at best, but on the other hand, if he turns out to be right, Dr. Dibble and his colleagues will look like absolute tools. So which one is it then? Anyway, that's it from me. Let me know in the comments below what you think about all of this. Don't forget to also check out my Patreon. I'll be posting new videos there this week, so don't miss out on those. And if you're not a regular of this channel yet, hit the subscribe button and give me a thumbs up if you ended up enjoying this video. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you all in the next one.
Can I interrupt you? How old is that image, the image that you just showed?
It's from like the 14th century BC.
Okay.
14th century AD, you mean?
AD, sorry, yes. I misspoke. Chill.
So this